evening, everyone. Welcome to Creative Conversations. This is Stephanie Gillard, the CEO and Producing Artistic Director at American Stage. And tonight is scheduled to be the last of our Creative Conversations. We originally scheduled this to be a June, every Monday update, as we're living in this incredibly dynamic landscape where things are shifting so fast. And based on the continuation of the dynamic landscape that we are in and your feedback and participation in these conversations, we have decided to continue Creative Conversations. We'll return in July with a bi-weekly Creative Conversations. And I think we've got some dates we can put up real quick for you with topics to be announced in the near future. But July 13th, we'll be back after tonight. And then every other Monday at 6 p.m. for these 30-minute conversations. We'll be sure to keep these topical, really bringing you guests and conversations that connect us to what's going on right now as it relates to our community and the arts and the industry of professional live theater, our artists, our audiences, and really kind of stay together as we figure this all out and as we hold out for the moment when we get to really return together on stage. I want to move forward real quick tonight because I've got a couple of guests who I want to give as much time to as possible. We were talking backstage and we could have spent an hour just chatting backstage, just prepping for this. But, you know, there's a lot of talk right now about what is it going to mean, when will audiences be able to return back to the theater, and when can we have audiences back together in a shared space. Broadway just announced today, apparently Richard was just telling me this backstage, that Broadway just announced today that January 3rd, 2021 is their anticipated return. But of course, before audiences can come back together, we have to really consider, when can we bring performers into a rehearsal room together? When can performers come together and be in proximity in the intimacy of a rehearsal process and performance process? We can social distance in our seating, but what does that look like for performers? And of course, American Stage has been presenting virtual programs and doing some really kind of innovative practice of trying to figure out how to work with actors and tell stories in different locations. And we just completed our Shakespeare Light Festival yesterday with 12th Night. Our two guests tonight were featured throughout the festival. And so they're going to come talk about what's going on with them and what things are going to look like in the future. But first, I want to share just real quick, Actors Equity Association is the union for professional actors and stage managers. And they are helping to provide guidance for when actors and stage managers can go back to work. And they released this information about a month ago. And this was the first information they released. We're waiting for more, of course, but they've laid out 4 considerations deemed essential before it will be safe for members to go back to work. And those 4 are: the epidemic must be under control with effective testing, few new cases in the area, and contact tracing. Well, we know what's going on in our area right now. Number 2, individuals who may be infectious can be readily identified and isolated with frequent, regular, and accurate testing with speedy results. Number 3, the way members audition, rehearse, perform, and stage manage may need to change, and the venues we work in may need to undergo vet changes in order to reduce the risk. A lot of questions about what exactly that means and what that looks like. Number 4, efforts to control COVID-19 exposure must be collaborative, involving equity members, employers, the union, and all others involved in the production of theater. There must be collective buy-in and ongoing evaluation and improvement of health and safety practices. So obviously the union is taking a very strong position on maintaining the health and safety of their members. I'll just remind everybody, when the Spanish flu, when we experienced the Spanish flu, there wasn't an Actors Equity Association. And so there is this entity to look out for the actors. And as a producer, I'm really eager to continue our conversations with the unions because, of course, we want to ensure the health and safety of our actors, and we want to figure out ways to get them back to work and get them paid and get their health care. our two guests today are going to talk about that, and I'd like to invite them to join me. Both of them should be familiar to our audiences, Renata Eastlick and Richard Watson. They're going to Zoom in here, and I'll just kind of say a couple of quick things about them. Thank you both so much for being here. I adore you both, and I've had the great pleasure of directing both of these individuals. Really early on in my tenure with American Stage, Renata and I met almost as soon as I got here. Renata was in the Heights at an American Stage in the Park, and then I later cast her in Good People, where she was phenomenal in Good People. And then last year we worked together in Mamma Mia. And Renata has worked all over and is exceptionally talented. Worked in New York and throughout Florida, and we're blessed to have you here. And she was just featured as Olivia in 12th Night yesterday. And my dear friend, Richard Watson, who I got to meet for the first time in my first year as well. I directed Richard in the 39 Steps, but he had already worked for American Stage a number of times, notably in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I would have loved to have seen you in that, Richard. And Richard's worked with us many times since then, including in Joe Turner's Come and Gone, The Royale, and was slated to be on our stage. Actually, we would have just closed the production Admissions that Richard was cast in and worked on in California as part of our co-pro. And Richard was our Iago in Othello just a couple of weeks ago. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Well, we're going to just jump right in because we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. And I first just want to hear if you could just give us a brief idea of how you have been impacted by COVID-19 professionally. And Renata, we'll start with you.
Oof. It's been different, you know. Luckily, with theaters like American Stage, you have the opportunities to occasionally do a Zoom theater. But to be honest, I've had to kind of bootstrap things. I'm also a voiceover actor for video games. So voiceover is really picking up right now with actors. So a lot of people are creating their own home studios. So luckily I have some equipment. I don't have everything that I'd like to have, but you know, you do what you can. And I have a part-time job as an essential worker, you know, so I have to do what I can, because if there's no theater, you have to do something. I got to pay my bills. I have a mortgage to pay, you know, got car payments, et cetera, et cetera. And you figure it out. I've actually started drawing as well, because I draw. So I've started illustrating to make some money. So yeah, that's how it's personally affected me.
You know, our actors, theater actors are gig workers, but there's a lot of planning and timing out of lining up gigs to make sure that you've got your nut covered and you've got your healthcare lined up and all of that. So Richard, how have you been impacted by this?
Well, it's in December, both American Stage and Capitol Stage cast me in a co-production of Admissions by Josh Harmon. On the 13th of March, we were one day out of our first preview in Sacramento when Gavin Newsom closed the state. And so we got one performance of that show after rehearsing it for 3 weeks, and then it was done. And I stayed there in Sacramento for a while. I'm a New York City based actor, and my building has 750 people in it during a pandemic, and only 3 of the 7 elevators worked. So I wasn't going back to New York City. And then there was some question as to whether or not we were going to be able to perform the show here. I came to St. Pete, and that, of course, the admissions here was a no-go. And we were supposed to close yesterday.
Wow.
The matinee yesterday would have been the end of it. So again, that's, you know, that was planning for health insurance and, you know, being able to top off the savings enough to be able to go back to New York and audition again for the next gigs and set those up. And so right now I'm in a holding pattern, just like most everybody in this profession. The bulk, in fact, the totality of my income for 30 something years has been live theater. And so there's no real fallback for me. There's no secondary gig. There's nothing. This is how I've made the entirety of my income for well over 30 years, and my health insurance. And now, this is just that unusual circumstance of it. It's gone. I mean, it's completely gone. So that's where I stand right now.
Thank you for being so honest about that, because I think a lot of people don't maybe understand or recognize that professional actors who have built their careers doing this work, that this is a career, and this is what you rely on. So, I think sometimes people think, well, that's what you do, in between, or you do that sometimes, and you must have other things, because there's a lot of kind of jokes and understanding that actors have other jobs that they do, but really, they're acting that's been for both of you, your focus. You're trained. When you're not in the middle of a gig, you're planning and working towards your next gig. You're constantly training. You're constantly building your business, and even building your business right now is. I mean, I don't even know how you do that, and it's also created this really interesting and difficult dynamic between producers and actors. So, like, Richard, when I hear you talking about admissions, and we were so proud to be able to, offer actors these opportunities to gain a lot of health weeks because of the co-production with Capital Stage, right? Except and unless, I don't know, there's a pandemic, and then you lose, So it's something that I'm very much aware of and thinking about. How soon can we get back to getting actors working? We're doing that now with our virtual programs, but it's on a more limited scale, and it's not offering as robust of opportunities as you're looking for and need for just for sustenance. So as we look ahead at what Actors Equity is telling us, what is it going to mean to you? And I just want to hear your perspectives. Richard, we'll start with you, and then Renata, on what's going to make you feel safe, aside from what the union says and aside from what the producers say. What do you think it's going to take to really make it possible to come back to a shared space and rehearse and perform again? And while you're answering that question, I'm going to invite people to put any questions or comments into our chat room, and we'll try and make sure we make room at the end for some questions.
Well, I think the number one thing is, as a union actor, I am bound by my union. So it basically boils down to what kind of agreement can happen between a producer and the union to perform outside of the bounds of the union. You get into a lot of problems. So I'm relying to a certain degree on that communication to occur between those two entities. Not unwieldy, but it's a large organization that is very slow to change. And we're in a situation where change it has to occur, and it has to occur quickly. So it's definitely a butting of heads of reality versus reality. The reality is that the large bureaucracy has a very difficult time changing on a dime. And the reality is that everything has to change on a dime right now. So, but as far as coming back and feeling safe, I've worked for a lot of theater companies that when, you're anybody in the cast or anybody in the crew or anybody in the pit or, any of the stage management gets sick, gets the flu and has to leave, gets, bronchitis or gets strep throat or something like that. There are always contingencies of understudy and cast replacements and that sort of thing that are kind of in play. So I think that's got to be the way to go for both entities, for the producers and for the unions, just to really take a hard look and work out immediately the procedures that would go into cast replacement and understudy. We have to get back to work. If, I don't know when the audiences are going to feel safe to actually walk back into a dark space with a light so that a story is told to them. But when that occurs, I want to be there.
Yeah.
I want to be there, and and hopefully the procedures have been worked out that if I get sick, that if someone in the cast gets sick, that if someone backstage, someone in the pit, someone in the booth, someone in the house gets sick, that we have contingencies in place to the show must go on. In other words, can keep going on, have that person in quarantine, taken out, but in a situation where they're not going to lose their livelihood simply because they got sick for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and be able to come back in. I don't know how that works out. Thank God I'm not a producer. I'm just an actor. But to me, that feels very much like the way to go.
Yeah. How about you, Renata? What are your thoughts around feeling safe coming back into a rehearsal room again?
Right. One, I completely agree with Richard 100%. I think that's number one. Two, just in a slow rise to returning, I think we might have to see more one man, one woman, one person shows. I think we might have to see more two-handers. Because that way, if there is something that's implemented by the unions, temperature checks, or, you know, the union now says that, I don't know, they can't provide nurses on stages, but, you know, something where they create some sort of rule where there has to be someone from the medical field that has to give you COVID checks or whatever, in order to make the actors feel safe. Just basic sanitation. Sometimes some theaters fall short. Luckily, American Stage is not one of them. But at times that can be an issue even before COVID-19, you know, and that's why there is a union in place for little things like that. But it is difficult to answer that because we're all kind of living in that limbo stage and nobody really knows, and the union's trying to do their best, but they're still trying to figure things out. So it's difficult to really say, but I think Richard really hit it. You know, I would feel completely safe with that. And also, you know, just basic safety checks like temperature, et cetera, you know, that would not be infringing in somebody's rights or making them feel uncomfortable, but something that everybody would feel safe doing in order to come back.
Yeah, that's interesting. We could have a whole separate conversation about what kind of our rights and freedoms versus our responsibility, you know, to our communities within the acting community, as well as just our communities in general. But, you know, American Stage has been putting together protocols and guidelines and ever evolving. And we have a COVID task force with some expertise on that task force to help us determine what are the protocols that we need to make sure we're ready for. And so we're you know, moving all of that forward, but it does seem like there are some things like the ability to test,
right, that
if we don't have that, I mean, we can take temperatures, and we've bought we purchased you know, we have those ready, and doing small cast plays and doing some quarantining if we bring in an actor from out of town, or not doing out of town hiring for a while. We've talked about all of the different things, everything you can imagine. But until we can test quickly, and then of course there's the expense, you know, consideration around that, of how can we, you know, what are the tests going to cost? How quickly can we get those turned around? It is a curiosity of can we do social distancing performances? So I thought it was interesting when the new Vic and I was able to see their production of Lungs in London last October, and they're producing it again with a social distance version where the actors, it's a two-hander, and the actors are performing at a social distance from each other. How do you feel about the idea of that?
I love that idea. I had heard about that as well. And I thought that was really cool. And I was actually going to mention that I've heard about other theaters even doing musicals and having the actors sit on stools and social distantly sing through the musical, and have this, you know, live performance. So I'd do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, just thinking of the nitty gritties, I know you only got a couple of minutes, but thinking of the nitty gritties, you know, everyone shows up in masks. Everyone shows up with some kind of goggle on their eye areas. You know, you've got gloves and you know, rubbing alcohol stations everywhere. You could get through a rehearsal, an 8-hour rehearsal, 7 days a week. If everyone maintained that through the entirety, you could get conceivably, if you didn't get it, even bring it into the room elsewhere. I mean, a part of the contract, part of the social contract is that if you're in a show, and it's like anytime that you're in a show, if you're in a show, don't party. You can't go out. You know, if you're in a musical and you're taking a huge chunk of the show that it depends on your voice, you know, no partying. You got to stay home. You got to stay healthy. You got to stay hydrated, keep away from people. I think that basically we've got it. It's kind of in our DNA. We all try to do our best to maintain our health to be able to do a run. But now it's just going to be that extra, okay, well, when we're in the room, we also have to do these other things.
Yeah.
And and it basically comes down to the performance. You know, are you going to feel comfortable being on stage without having your mask and your gloves on and singing to someone, you know, maybe 12 feet away from you? It's when you look at the reality of it, it doesn't seem like it's that difficult. There's just going to be some like very detailed changes in procedure.
Right.
The stakes are higher and the accountability will be greater.
Yeah.
So when you talk, Richard, about how we know, you know, actors need to take care of themselves when they're in a show, don't go out and party till 3 a.m. when you have, you know, when you have to go sing the next day. But we know that some actors will do that. So the accountability, the stakes of that accountability are different. And what then is the relationship between the producer and the performers? And of course, the unions will get involved in that too, in what we can require and ask for.
Yeah.
I'm curious when we think like, it's impossible to know, but it is something that occurs to me when I think about when we are, let's say we're at a place where there's a vaccine and we've been able to lift most, if not all, of these social distancing and mask wearing requirements. You know, when you work on stage, one of the things that's so exciting about live performance is how visceral that live experience is, and literally, not to gross people out, but literally, like you can see the spit leaving another actor. And I've been on stage. I know you all have, you know, as a performer, and have been the recipient of that spittle hitting your face. That's part of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that, what do you think the long-term implications of just that kind of intimacy that stage actors have just gotten used to as being a part of what you all do?
Yeah, I think what would be really interesting, speaking to that, is that what if we went back to the old rep theater model, you know, and let's say, okay, well, I know that I'm going to pick shows and only maximum I need ensemble, a troupe of 8 actors. These 8 actors we will have in our theater budget COVID-19 testing for these 8 actors that we will hire for a year, and they will be our troupe. And sometimes you're the lead and sometimes you're in the ensemble, and you just hire your little troupe. So if they spit on you, you're good, because none of us got the COVID.
I mean,
it's
it really boils down to that implicit, if not sign on the dotted line contract of you need to behave as an employee, even though you're not, you know, even though when you walk out of the rehearsal, you're not on the clock anymore. You are a professional and have to continue to remain professional for that entire season. I mean, for 10 months or however long that season is, you have to continue to behave in a manner that will not impede. If you're spitting at each other, you know, in normal when spitting at each other is an awful way of putting it, but you know what I mean. When you're in the theater and you're having a conversation with somebody, people are going to get wet. The front row is going to get wet. You know, it's, you know, what was it they were always saying about Laurence Olivier? He said, if you ever went to see him in a live production, don't sit in the first 2 front rows.
The splash section.
Right. You know, and this is a very well-trained professional that was making sure that he could be heard in the back row. And those things are required.
Yeah. It's Kristen is listening, and I'm going to ask her to. I know we've got some questions and comments that have come in, quite a few, and we're only going to have time for a couple. And I do want to have one. I want to ask you guys one more questions before we finish up. I knew we were going to not have nearly enough time tonight.
Right.
But let me let you jump in for a minute with a question or two.
Sure. There was a great comment about acting being therapeutic during the time of COVID, and how it might be fueling you as people, and helping you heal through the craft of acting, and what other creativity you might be dealing with during lockdown.
Wow, yes. Acting is completely therapeutic. I find myself going over my whole monologues, even though I don't have any gigs coming up. And also just reminding ourselves that as artists, we're just creatives in general. So one thing that I've been doing that I briefly mentioned in the beginning is that I've always drawn, but somehow I just forgot that I did that. And a friend of mine who's a lovely actress that has worked at American Stage, Julia Rufino, was telling me, well, if you've drawn, why don't you just pick it up again? And I said, you know what, I'm going to do that. And it's been so therapeutic to find other ways within the arts, right, to be able to do things. And I actually got my first logo job the other day.
Nice.
And, so I think that as creatives, it's in us, it's raw. We're gonna find different things to do. A friend of mine has started, he's a costume designer and he has nothing to do, so he started making puppets. He made himself a Kermit, and that's been therapeutic for him. So I love that question, because it's true. We find our own ways of healing, and I think it's important to do that, because otherwise you get so consumed by everything that's going on that you forget to be human, and that you're human, and that you need to heal and you need to de-stress. It's an important thing. So great question, whoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great question.
There was also a question around, is it possible to use the guidelines that the Film Actors Union is putting forth, SAG-AFTRA, that they have guidelines for making films safely during this time? So is that something that theaters could adopt?
Well, I think the short answer to that is that as Richard mentioned, we operate under Actors Equity Association as producers. So those are the guidelines that we will be required to follow. But I think that one of the things that's been happening all along is every time there are new someone has taken a step forward in figuring out how to bring people together, and they've created guidelines that we're all looking to that. Everything is setting a precedence. So all of those kinds of precedents are useful and valuable to us. So we will learn from those. And there's the possibility that some equity theaters like American Stage will also start working with the other unions if we continue to work in the virtual medium. So, these actors who currently are working for us under Actors Equity contracts may start working for us under SAG contracts. So we would be working under those guidelines too. My last question for each of you, I want to look ahead and hear what you both think about the future of theater, both what you see, what you think is likely to happen, what your hope is for the future of live theater.
I hope, like all of us, we are in an imposed pause, and it just came completely out of the blue. There was no prep for it. It's like suddenly we're in a pandemic and we have to pause and we have to stop what we're doing, and we don't know when it's going to end. And I hope that all of us, and we are doing this as a nation, we should do this as a theater, is take the pause as an opportunity to reflect, to reevaluate what the institution is and what it can do, with new direction, new focus, new tools. One of the things we're going to find over the next month, and we've already done it with Shakespeare Light, is the new tools that we have at our disposal. How can we use those to our advantage in a situation where you can't aspirate in a space with 200 people? Finding new voices, new stories, new people. I think that it's an opportunity to reevaluate where we were, what was working, what wasn't working, and try to fold in new ideas, new people, new directions, a new focus, and a reevaluate of what it is that we actually do.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything you want to add, Renata?
Yeah. I feel like my hope for the future of live theater is for it to go back to its roots. And I know that sounds weird. So what do I mean by that? I feel like a lot of theater has become extremely commercialized. Don't get me wrong, I love me a good Broadway reworking of Tootsie and Mrs. Doubtfire, right?
Or Cheers, or Cheers.
Right, right. However, I do think it's time for us to get more creative. There's a theater company that I really love dearly in Chicago called the House Theater of Chicago, and they work mainly as a troupe, and they create new works in-house with their company members, which is really cool. And I remember watching my first house theater show, and they did this show called Death and Harry Houdini, and their company member, Dennis Watkins, is actually a third generation magician. And obviously Death and Harry Houdini is about the illusionist Harry Houdini. And he performed all of his tricks live in a simple black box theater because that was the skill set that he had. He was a magician.
Right.
So I'd love to see theaters use this opportunity to reimagine things. I'd like to think that, it's a time to reestablish the local theater community, hold virtual open calls and really get to know the local actors. And do you have any other hidden talents that we can start finding out before we go back, because really, how do we reach the local theater community, like the local New York community, the local Florida community, the local Chicago, LA, wherever? It's by investing and hiring local talent. And especially with these travel restrictions, like when are we gonna, I did a show in New York City because I lived there before and I had connections with the public theater, and I got hired to do an understudy role for colored girls. But when am I gonna be able to go back to New York? I don't know.
Right.
When is Richard gonna be able to work out of town? We don't know.
Right.
So I feel like if the people start going back to the root of theater, that raw, beautiful root of theater of troops, and creating locally and reinventing what that's like, I think it could be really interesting. And also changing theater from the top up. Do you have enough diversity in your board of directors? Do you have enough diversity in your staffing? Are you really invested in colorblind casting and not just, we're going to hire a show that's just with people of color just because, you know what I mean? And actually, American Stage is really good at doing that. You know what I mean? So there are theaters out there that are extremely good at finding the diversity and doing those things, and there are some that could learn from that. So I think it would be really cool to see all of this kind of time for everybody to rethink and reimagine and just reflect on how we are a community. That's my hope.
I think all of the theaters have some work to do on on dismantling some of the old ways and some of the areas where there is a lack of diversity of thought and innovation and inclusion. And the thing I love about the answers you both gave is you both kind of spoke to the idea of really treasuring the essence of what this art form is. And my hope is that this art form will become even more valued because of the forced distance that we have had, and that will allow us to go back to the essence of what is beautiful and important about this art form, but to do it in a new way that truly makes the art form for everybody. And I love actors and stage managers so much. And if you don't have the good fortune of knowing a professional actor or stage manager, and you've just experienced their fine work on the stage, I just want to say that they're some of the best people, just souls and the most intelligent and empathetic people you will ever meet. And I think it's time for us to rethink the way in which we involve performers in what we do beyond the gig kind of relationship that theaters and producers have with actors. So we'll see what that means. Who knows? We're still figuring this all out together, but indeed we do need each other. And so
and we have time.
Yes.
We do. Whether we want it or not, we have some time. And thank you so much for giving me your time tonight. And I apologize that we didn't have more time to talk, but I'm grateful that you went over a little bit with me. And if you had questions that we didn't get to, I apologize for that too. Thank you for being with us. All of our creative conversations are on our YouTube channel, so you can watch previous weeks. Last week, we talked about anti-racism in practice. And let me know, send us your comments and your ideas about upcoming creative conversations. What's important to you? What do you want to be talking about? What kind of guests do you want to see? Renata and Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are really important to me personally and to American Stage. I love you both, and take care, and we will continue to figure this out together.
Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.